Hello, and welcome back to Leadership in the Dealership podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Keishawn Batts, and I'm joined today by someone that I've known for 5 years, someone I consider a friend, but many of you may know broadly in the industry because of her vast experience. But Amira, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Keishawn, so much. I'm really excited to be here, and you and I get to have that chat. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amir, I know you pretty well, and I've known your history for quite some time now. Again, having worked with you and built our relationship over the last 5 years. But why don't you tell some of the listeners about your experience, where you've been in auto, and just how it has helped you throughout your career?
Of course. So I started my career in automotive 17 years ago. So it feels like a long time ago, but it passed by very, very quickly. And it almost happened by accident. At the time I was working in the financial services space, I was working in the mortgages space. And I remember at some point I must have applied for Capital One. They are going through a big expansion that's happening. They were going through multiple merger and acquisition with banks, specifically in the Southeast. And I got a phone call from them. And this was around like the financial crisis. So around 2006, 2007. Went in for an interview, knew enough about lending at the time, working in mortgages, ended up joining them in an underwriter capacity, had kind of a territory in the Southeast. I really got to learn the automotive space, the ABC of what it takes to retail a vehicle and finance the vehicle through Capital One. Spent about 6-7 years with them, worked across the underwriting space, really in risk management, assessing the risk of the loans, pricing loans, things like that. I was a buyer. And then from there went into the field area where I was a sales rep for them. Actually, they ended up promoting me, bringing me into a new the Mid-Atlantic region to expand region with them. And after about 6-7 years, I felt like I needed more. I need to continue to kind of enhance my experience and experience different organization. Was recruited by Ally, and at the time, Ally was going through a transition from that GMAC structure that they had with GM to the Ally to Ally, where they were targeting every dealer and indirect kind of lending. So joined them. I was tasked by expanding again the Mid-Atlantic region and expanding Ally in that region. I spent with them a year before I ended up moving to the West Coast due to personal reasons. And that's where my journey began with JP Morgan Chase. And it was really interesting because when I joined JP Morgan Chase, I joined within the white label space. And that was very different, where I spent the first 7-8 years of my career working with dealers and on lending, financial institution. That was the first time where I'm working inside of a financial institution, but really focused on the OEM relationship and the dealer combined. So it was actually worked for them, had the central and western region, had multiple reps in there, about 180 dealerships, and really focused on a couple of things. One, the adoption of lease and loans, obviously, and the pricing of that for a captive, Jaguar Land Rover Financial Group, the remarketing space. So I was exposed to a new area of the industry altogether, which is remarketing, as well as marketing. And I spent about 3-4 years doing that for them before I was tasked into starting the white label. The first white label they had was the ultra luxury OEM, which was Aston Martin. So spent 2-3 years, built Aston Martin Financial Services from scratch, got to really a lot of exposure around the commercialization of vehicle in the ultra luxury segment and what that consumer looks like, which would be very different customer than what I worked with Capital One, what I worked with Ally, and with Jaguar Land Rover Financial Group. Then was recruited by Lucid, and that's when I got a first-hand experience in starting like a financial services captive from really the very scratch and a global scale. So worked for them, had oversight over the North America region, Europe, and the Middle East. Obviously, that's where we got to know each other, worked together a little bit towards the end of your career. It was Bank of America on the launch of Lucid Financial Services here in the US, and did that for about 2 years before I was tasked to be head of sales for them in North America. Had oversight for the US and Canada, and it was really kind of translated all of these years working with dealers, all of these years working with financial institution, OEMs, into bringing that to kind of commercialize the Lucid Air. I'll spend about a year doing that before I went to Fisker, which which is the most recent thing that I have done. And I was in charge of sales, marketing, and financial services. It was a very short tenure there, obviously, because of many challenges there. And here I am leading VoltAlytics. So it's kind of my own consulting firm that I started the spring of this year, and it's been a journey, and it's been fun. It's been really fun to kind of do it from that side.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that like I hope resonates with everybody that is listening is like your career has gone across the path around like digitization and indirect lending, right? You think about your time at Capital One and what they're really known for, Auto Navigator and Dealer Navigator, and then you took some of that experience and that passion for automotive and helped JP Morgan Chase, Aston Martin, and Jaguar Land Rover to increase their abilities to overcome some of their challenges and opportunities. And then you took a brand new EV startup and like led their financial services and were able to use a lot of that information you gained both from Capital One and JP Morgan Chase, having that white label experience to delight your customers, delight your investors, and creating a really cool experience. So like that's one of the things I get really excited about anytime we talk is just the shared knowledge that we both have across the automotive space. I think many of our career experience have crossed paths with one another, maybe in different timelines, but certainly there's a lot about you that I think it's really exciting. So I'm gonna throw a curveball for a second. One of the things I always am interested in when I talk to people about cars and automotive is like, if sustainability weren't a challenge or anything at all in that world, like what would be the dream car for Amira?
Oh, the dream car for me. That's a really good question. You know, I got to experience a lot of cars in my career, right? I would have to say about a year and a half ago, I want to say I was in Pebble Beach, and I got to see a classic Bronco restored, and that is my dream car right now.
All right. Hey,
So,
it's nothing wrong with that. Look, everybody has their dream car. I will say that my dream car is the first electric Porsche 911. So Aisha over at Porsche, if you're listening, when you're ready to give those up for reserve, I'll be happy to sign up for
yeah,
one. So let's kind of jump into some of the questions and let's like have this be super engaging and informal. Informal. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't know about you, and hopefully we can get it out a little bit, is just like your passion for this industry and your passion for indirect lending, OEMs, captive relationships, and just how chronically discontent you are with improvement and ensuring processes and procedures get better and making sure that things are having the best efficiency that are possible. So when you talk about you creating your own consulting firm based on your subject matter expertise, what kind of insights do you passionately bring to your OEMs and dealer groups, maybe that they're not thinking about today?
one of the things that really kind of differentiated me in the seats that I have been in is my ability to wear my customer's hats, right? And it doesn't matter who that customer is, if it's an end consumer, if it's an OEM, if it's a bank on the other in front of me, like thinking through the lens of the customer and what they need for, my client to be successful, right? So I'm always like kind of poking at that to improve processes, to improve systems, to improve the operation of things. So when I think about like what's really important for us, that what really drive the innovation, we have to think about EV as a new class of assets, right? And that's often really something that um, kind of, I don't want to say ignored is not the right word for it, but there's not a lot of thought into it, right? We're looking at it like it's a customer buying another car, and we're in a different phase of this EV adoption that we got to think about. That customer that buying the other car is probably likely their first EV ever, because we ran through that all the early adopters, right? So right now we are dealing with customers that are driving ICE vehicles, right? And they may not be EV enthusiasts, but they're definitely thinking, okay, do I need to jump on that ship or not now, right? There's a lot of education, there's a lot of gaps in the industry, and there's a lot of unmet need from the customer side that often OEMs and not dealers are not thinking through. And that's where I can come in that process and kind of like put my customer hat on, as well as all the other stakeholder, and really help guide them through that change and that transformation.
Absolutely awesome. And like as we think about that transformation, now you've worked with Lucid Motors and Fisker, like two EV companies. But as you think more broadly to some of the ICE OEMs or other EV manufacturers, how do you think the market will evolve with customer expectations? And what opportunities do you see traditional dealerships that have such a big footprint in a local area to both transition their ICE customers into EVs and keep selling those EVs in the what again the question that you have is like how the world continues to evolve.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that we're gonna see, right? I mean, I think right now such an ambiguous market for EVs, right? Because again, we ran out of the early adopters, and now we have to really think about what is that next wave of customers should look like. So EV adoption is going to continue to increase. I think what's causing unease out there, it's not going to increase at the same rate, right? But we're par for the course. When you have any new product and there is a transformation happening, it's gonna at some point, even though that rate was like a skyrocketed, now it's kind of slowing down because now you are talking to the average consumer that's buying the car and have to think about it in the traditional sense. It's no longer like the enthusiast behind it. So that's not going away. Now, how do you conquest that customer and educate them in the process to make them comfortable to take that, leap of faith and transition into electric vehicle? The other part is like what I think will happen is OEMs are going to continue to roll out new EVs. We're seeing that Polestar just announced their Polestar 4. You have the Polestar 3, Rivian coming up with the R2 and the R3, right? So now we're also diversifying that product to coverage all different segments of a vehicle buying, right? You have the pickup, you have the SUV, you have the sedan, and you have them across all segments. So I think again, this is another thing that we're going to be experiences, and we're going to continue to see OEM diversifying the lineup. But now they may think about it a little bit more. They're going to take a step back for sure, and we're seeing that with OEM for sure. They're rolling back some of their plans, some of the dates that they have shared, all of that stuff. But again, that's a part of the course when you're going through a transformation and adoption of something else. What's really going to be interesting over the next couple of years is the used EV market, right? And that is a market that's untapped yet, meaning we have leased ICE vehicles for a long time, and we have had ICE vehicles come off of leases. We had them being traded, and there is a very robust used car market that's happening out there, including the wholesaler and the online auctions and the inline auctions and all of that. The industry is very comfortable with that. When it comes to the EV used car market and wholesaling these EVs, we're still taking the same approach that traditional auction houses is taking the same approach as the regular ICE vehicles. And that really creates an opportunity for companies. I don't know if you follow many of the startups out there, a company like Plug, that's really going in and focuses in this online auction, but specifically to the EV space, and providing dealers to kind of acquire from there quality EVs that they feel confidence in. So that's going to be like another segment that we have to pay attention to. And with that meaning is finance product would also as that EV use market kind of like almost explode all of a sudden, because you're coming, all of these EVs have been enabled, the transaction have been enabled through leasing. Now you're going to look into how do I finance a used EV as an attractive rate? And that means for all of these finance companies and banks out there, they have to think about again in that class of assets. And they have been really, a lot of banks have been very slow to do that. Some of the most pioneering banks in automotive finance have been very cautious about stepping into the EV space. And my advice is always like, step in, because more data for you means you create more informed decisions through modeling, through all the data that you collect, so you can underwrite these assets and assess risk and get more comfortable with that. So we need to see kind of like that's gonna change a little bit, and hopefully banks are gonna get comfortable with more used EVs, because just looking through maturity schedules of different OEMs that have leased EVs, it's gonna, all of a sudden we're gonna be like in all of these vehicles coming, but we're not ready yet. Dealers have to also be ready for that. I am a strong believer that we need to have EV centers and we need to have specialization, because again, it's not the same car. Until we get the market to 50% EV adoptions, you're gonna have to specialize. And maybe it's within that dealership itself. You have a couple of subject matter experts that can talk about the product, or it may be kind of a standalone EV center, right? Like you think about it from a used car marketplace. I think that consumer are also going to grow, their interest is going to grow. And we know that customer already start their buying journey for cars online, but now they're not only doing that, the ICE customers are looking into EVs. They may not be there ready yet to pull the plug, but they're definitely, it's a part of their search, and that's increasing. I actually just read a study about that last week. And I think the biggest change is going to be in the infrastructure. The investment in the infrastructure, especially the charging infrastructure, is not going away. That's going to increase. But again, everything is going to happen at a slower pace, and that's okay. That's what happened when you're bringing a brand new product right now, and it's really across a mass. Like at this point, we're reaching the mass consumer, and we need to kind of think through their eyes and their lens how to make them comfortable. That was a long answer to your question.
No, absolutely. I think all of that is super valuable. And the next question or the next thought I have kind of goes into customer experiences, right? Like customer demand of how they experience a product or brand is totally different today than maybe even before pre-pandemic. But like for example, like my favorite clothing brand doesn't offer 2 day shipping, and as much as I love that brand, I'm so annoyed. Like, why can't I get this within 2 days? And I think as you look at the automotive space, you think of the organizations you've known very well: Aston Martin, Jaguar Land Rover, Lucid. Like there is a expectation of the experience to purchase that car. There's an expectation of a luxury experience in some of those instances. But as you think about some of the things that you just mentioned, aligned to customer expectations on same day delivery, like delivering a car to a home or going into a dealership, like how do we create a experience for customers that is wildly adopted across the different brands or across the different expectation levels? Like, as technologically savvy as I like to think that I am with Amazon and Apple and the level of service that they provide, I am still kind of on the fence about like having my brand new car delivered to my home, right? Like I still want that affinity of that new car smell. I still want a salesperson to kind of bring me a bottle of sparkling water before my test drive. Like all these different experiences and expectations I have in my head. But as you think about the S curve for electric vehicles, you say it's going to be kind of slower than we had anticipated. How might we plan for better experiences for customers and the dealerships across the brands as it relates to electric vehicles?
It's a really good question because I'll tell you, in the last 3 months, I was gonna buy. I have an ICE vehicle, and obviously I was driving EVs for a while now, but I wanted to buy my own EVs, right? So I started looking at dealerships into EVs, and I've called two different dealerships for a specific legacy OEM that offers a pretty nice EV, and I wanted to look at that. And both dealerships have failed me, right? And I come from the industry, and that was really eye opening to me. So that's one thing I went to very recently myself. Then the other part of that is I went through that when I built the financing experience for Lucid, right? One of the biggest thing that when I joined the company was we need to make it all digital. We are not going to use anything that traditional space uses, and we're gonna do it like, let's just code it like Tesla did it, right? And Tesla had just they were really in a unique position, and I'm not trying to discount. They have forced a big transformation on us, and it was the right thing to do. But we built an entire digital experience. But the complexity of buying a car, which is the second biggest purchase for the average consumer, it's the second biggest purchase they ever make. And even though customers say they want digital, 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 what we found out when it came to understanding the financing, aligning the car they want with the payment they want, with the tax implication, with this, with leasing, with all of this, is customers need to speak to someone. At some point of that transaction, they needed to speak to someone. They needed to speak to someone that can explain the tax implication, the different terms, the different mileage, loan, lease, which is better, all of that stuff. And a lot of companies have just adapted digital experiences. So, for example, when I was trying to buy a car and the dealers were working for me, they kept sending me like a calculator, a link to the calculator. I'm like, I can manually sit here and calculate. And I tried to explain that I can calculate my own APR, like for a loan, and my own lease payment. Like, I have no problem with that. I want you to educate me if this is what my objectives are. What do you recommend for me to do? Because I know how rate sheet works and the lease terms and the mileage, and I just wanted to like get to the best spot I can be. They couldn't do that, right? So I think what we have to do is leverage a couple of things. Digital retailing is not going away. That digital experience is not going away. It's staying. Leverage AI in addition to all of these digital platforms that we have, and really, again, back to these specializations of EV expert that can understand the customers and bring it all together, because every customer is going to be unique. And like you and I, we know this industry in and out. We know financing a car in and out. We know how to buy and sell cars, right? But it's very unique. You wanted to speak to someone, I wanted to speak to someone at some point. And this is like coming from two people that know this space. So it's how do you actually tailor that experience to every single customers, and understanding leveraging AI, leveraging digitization to speak to the customer at the right time, the right place, to kind of get them from point A to point Z in that transaction. And that we don't do. We haven't done that very well. We have either just adopted like, oh no, you come to the dealership and we'll keep you hostage for 6 hours, or we're going to put it all online and you're going to get a concierge person that really cannot speak about the product or the car to you or the financial transaction. And it's got to be somewhere in the middle. And there are people, and I don't want to generalize, because there are retailers that do this better than others, and there are retailers that have that, but I don't know um, if that's the exception or actually the rule yet. And then we know within the OEM that are direct to consumer, they are also being challenged with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things I want to pull a thread at just a little bit is that you mentioned financing a car for a moment. And, throughout your career, you've established relationships with an assortment of lenders, even being your own captive at Lucid. But talk to me a little about how you see financial products evolving within the industry and like how that will impact a dealer. Like, for example, the subscription model was really hot and heavy right before the pandemic, right? Ride share, like that was going to be the thing. That was going to be the thing of the future for automotive financial products. But for a variety of different reasons, both of those models seem to have tempered down quite a bit over the last few years. Talk to me a little bit about your vision for financial products for customers and dealers in the evolving months and years ahead.
Yeah, so two things like we should focus on. I think there is one of them is, as you kind of like adopt to financing a new class of assets like EVs, right? You really have to rethink also about the term. So one of the things that I experimented with when I was with Lucid is shorter term leases. Right. And for a new brand and a new product, that worked great. Actually, if anything, that enables so many transactions that we weren't able to kind of tap into before that, that it became kind of the most prevalent terms we were selling. So that tells you something. It also was a reason why a customer that may have been hesitant to get into an EV and make that transition from ICE to say, oh, if I can stay in a car for 18, 24 months, it's not a long time. And then I can always either buy the car out or do this and do this. So really, I would encourage a lot of like the financial institution to take a step back and think about what do these finance programs need to look like, right? There's also something about with the technology is vehicles now are staying with consumer a lot longer than ever before, right? The quality of the vehicle, the fact that you can do over the air updates, the fact that the vehicle is not just a piece of hardware, the technology allows you to keep that vehicle much longer, is think about the terms of these loans and leases, the mileage that you allow with them, the aftermarket product, the insurance product, the maintenance package, and the warranties. They're going to be completely different than what it looks like to us. The other part is like the rise of that mobility as service, like you're talking about the ride sharing and and all of these different things. We gotta think about when you go into mass adoptions, you gotta think about the shift that's happening, generational shift that's happening, right? By the time EVs we get into a 30% and a 50% EV adoptions, you're gonna be tailoring everything to Gen Z, right? The millennials and Gen X's, forget that. You're going to be tailoring to a brand new generation. You've got to think about how they think. What is their ownership model that they are comfortable with, right? Is it using ride sharing? Is it using, a car share product? That's what we have to think about. And again, because the financial institutions, they're conservative for every reason. They're the one that take the risk on all of these products. They've gotta establish models and try to kind of dip into it slowly and experiment with it to be able to provide products that can enable mass adoptions of EVs. And that is being experimented with right now. One of the other things that I also think about is in the opportunity since I started VoltAlytics is I've been able to work with a lot of automotive startup, like tech startups in the automotive ecosystem that are providing like great products, building great products and great platforms, but they're not all connected together, right? Each one of them is solving for small problems, right? And as I'm thinking, I'm trying to kind of like connect all the dots to think about all the different use cases that product can work for, the different customers, that how would that product work for a direct to consumer OEM versus a legacy OEM with franchise dealers. So all of these things is like if you bring that ecosystem and that synergy all together for all of these tech startups, you end up with really solidified products. And that's something like I'm sure big companies like Cox Auto may be thinking about, right? And they are exploring that. So I think there is a lot of synergy there. I think one of the other things that we have to think about as well is, again, financing things that we didn't think about financing before, like the charging of the vehicles and the equipment that you need and the installation of that, something like that actually that charging just on ongoing basis, like whether that's move into some point into a membership within an ecosystem, right? With kind of set fees that you can leverage versus how we're doing it right now. So there's so many things that are going to arise and we're going to have to start thinking about them, but I think we're always better positioned if we can anticipate them instead of waiting to them to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that here at Upstart, we love a good anecdote. So could you kind of share a dealership that you've worked with recently in your consulting firm, where your thoughts and wisdom and philosophy throughout your years of experience was able to bring like tangible benefits to help them align their strategy ahead? Like, I'd really be interested to understand how that's worked for you and the dealer.
Yeah, I think from a dealer perspective, it was really interesting because as I transitioned into Fisker and we're looking at that shift in the model into a franchise model, I've got to work with a lot of really my older dealers and a lot of people I've had a lot of admiration for throughout my career. And I will use two examples here. Like if you think from a just traditional dealers at franchise dealers, I've worked with two groups that I was really impressed by with from an EV readiness, right? And they were one of the first early adopters as well. So the the Price family group up in Northern California, they were one of the first dealers to ever get the Polestar, right? Like if not the first dealer on the West Coast, and done great in that market, penetrating that market and helping Polestar get selling their vehicles there. And they were very comfortable as I was talking to them with kind of rolling out EVs and speaking about that with a direct an OEM like Fisker back then. So I really kind of admire that because they understood EV readiness very well. The other group that I worked with, and I was very impressed by their operation, and you're probably familiar with them, is Damian Mills Auto Group out of the Carolinas, right? And I was also very, very impressed by his readiness for EVs because when you think about the sentiment that's been out there, is dealers have been resistant to EVs. No, I've actually, if anything, I have experienced the complete opposite of that. Their enthusiasm and readiness and their willingness to invest. However, if the investment, it just depends on the size of the investment, right? And the whole thing was about eliminating burdens on them to kind of invest in what it needs to be for them to carry, a dealership that's EV only. So I was very impressed by his operation and his also involvement of the community, and in him leveraging that to kind of increase adoption in his state. Then on the used car side, like what I've seen also from like used car dealers that are really kind of embrace technology, digital retailing, and if anything perfected, is two group H Greg, which I worked with also and got to speak to, do a phenomenal job for digitization and being able to kind of help the customer and meet them where they need to meet them across the entire transaction, as well as Eastern Automotive and their ability to kind of penetrate the Virginia, Maryland market and just kind of establish a name for themselves and in their community, and also their willingness to adopt EVs and kind of take that on. So I was very impressed by that. So I wanted to kind of use dealers from all over, because I think, as you talk to dealer, you truly realize they are very excited about EVs. It's just a matter of like helping them kind of like along the way of that, but they're already kind of ready, which unlike what's kind of common is dealers are resistant to it. I didn't see that at all.
Yeah. No. Well, hopefully our listeners and viewers are getting the wealth of knowledge that I know that you have across the spectrum within the automotive space. Again, starting with the indirect lending, the OEMs, the captives, your consulting team. So I'm really excited to have spent this time and get to know you a little bit more. I learned something new myself. But one of the things that we do every episode is we want to spotlight a dealer. But in this case, let's talk about a dealer, an OEM, a lending partner, whomever you choose that's within the auto ecosystem, and call out their leadership that they have, the process they've implemented, and maybe the technology. Like if you had to pick one entity that's really impressing you today, that's not the Mills Automotive Group with Damien and Kelly, who else would it be and why?
So one of the tech startups that I've been working with and I've been very, very impressed by what they are doing is Plug. Jimmy Douglas is the founders, and he come from the automotive space. He also has years of experience, and I've been talking to Jimmy. Sometimes it's on daily, multiple times a day, to kind of help him create the ecosystem of wholesaling EVs, right? And what would it take for him to kind of provide the confidence and instill confidence in dealers when they buy EVs off an auction, and kind of like what that means from his side, but through the lens of the dealer, because his mission is the adoption of EVs, but really taking a completely different part of the ecosystem, which is the online auctions and the wholesaling to dealers. So it's been very, very impressive. If you go on his website and sign up for his daily drop that he emails out, the inventory that he has and what they list, and the product he's putting together to support also the transactions for dealers as they buy EVs and kind of commercialize them and sell them to end users. So this is like, I would say, one of the companies that I've been very passionate supporting, and it's been very intriguing. And actually, like, in the conversation is how we challenge each other and how I challenge how he's approaching something, but he also is like opening my eyes to a whole bunch of things that I didn't realize in the remarketing space, what happens there to actually make it effective for dealers and make it effective for him. So really check out Plug. Very impressive what he's doing, him and his team.
Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you for your time, your grace, your willingness to be open and candid about the opportunities that you view in the space today, and even the things that are working really well with some of the partners that you're working with today and in the past. So again, thank you so much for your time, Amira. We look forward to seeing you in person in the future, and thank you for the listeners that tuned in today. And again, I'm Keishawn Batts here with the Leadership in the Dealership podcast, and we look forward to hosting you all again soon.